This video is just one part of a complete set of videos which we've called Making Effective Selections. As you can see by the subheading here, we're going to be making a cutout of a complex subject from a complex background, but without using a selection at all. Now this may seem a rather odd thing to do, that in a set of videos on the subject of making effective selections, that we're going to make a cutout without a selection. I'm going to demonstrate this because the technique works really well. It's another option when we're making the decision to cut out a complex subject from a complex background, and it is one that I have used for years, and as I always say, if you find something that works, we tend to want to stay with it. Or, at the very least, it does give us another string to our bow, as the saying goes. Now, I've used this image for quite a number of years to demonstrate this topic. You can see it's formed from a layer mask on the right hand side. If I hold the Shift key and click the mask, I'll temporarily turn it off. The image has been shifted to the left, as you can see, but you can see the fussy background and the bicycle. But I think if I zoom into this image, most people would be reasonably happy with the quality of the selection we have and the cutout. Now, I've been searching my archives looking for a complicated subject that's going to give us a challenge, and I found a very old car, an old Bentley. So what I want to do first is to open up the basic image into Photoshop. So here we have the old Bentley car that I want to cut out. I think there's two areas that are going to be a little bit of a challenge. The first of those is the grid here. Because the grid that's protecting the headlight stands out from the headlight, we've got to cut out between all of these shapes, and if we're going to put this image in front of a darker background, we could have problems with the fringing or the halo. So we've got to be a bit careful there. I'll hit Control 0. The other issue we have, whenever we cut out cars from a field, which is most of the time when we go to a car show, we've got a problem with grass at the bottom of the tyre. If we leave the grass in, then the grass has got to form a part of any composite we make, and most of the time I found I don't want the grass. So first of all, I'm going to make a selection and maybe transform that selection. So I think what we may do is leave the techniques to do that to a separate video. All we've got to do to make a start here is to add a layer mask. I'm going to zoom in to the corner of my car because I have to pick somewhere to start. I'm going to pick up a standard soft edge brush. I'm going to use my opacity at 100%, my flow at 100%, and throughout the entire technique I'm going to be making my brush quite small, but I'm going to be using that click and shift technique. So click to paint, hold the Shift key, move a distance away, click again, and we paint between two straight lines. Now the use of this shift click method, you'll notice, is extremely similar to what we demonstrated with the quick mask tools, if you've seen that video. Also what we did with the polygonal lasso, that when we click to start the process and hold the Shift key, even though we're only masking in our case in straight lines, we can actually go around quite tight corners, which I think we're going to demonstrate here, simply by having a longer step on the straight edges and a shorter step on the curve, and you'll soon get a feel for this. So I'm going to flood my mask with white. Control backspace will do that. Get myself into position. I don't think you're going to need to watch this for very long because you'll get a feel for this pretty quickly. So click, hold the Shift key, click, click, click. You can see I'm going to bite just a pixel or two into the image, but there's nothing to stop us once we've actually created the mask in using Select a Mask to enhance it. As usual, when I run out of picture space, I can touch the spacebar. The hand tool appears, but I don't lose my previous tool. So I can scroll across, click, hold the shift, click, 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 click. And once you get used to this, and I'm using a graphics tablet, a Wacom graphics tablet, you can see it's quite quick. I can rest my thumb on the spacebar, click and drag, and I'm off and running. As you can see by the change on the screen, I've just brought you up to a different place here, so I can click. Didn't get that quite right. I'll click again. I've probably got a brush that's a little bit on the big side here, so if you're doing this, you don't have to do it all in one sitting, and you can make a bigger image and a smaller brush if you want more critical work, but that looks pretty good. And then I can go further up. Now I've actually already made this selection, and I did so in advance so I could tell you that it took me 10 minutes to go around the outer edge of this car. Now that's quite a lot of the work done, and that's not a long time. So when I get up to this point, I've got a little knobbly bit here, so sometimes I may choose to drop my brush size down a little bit and then just go around this a little bit more carefully. I find it's these bits that make the cutout and the resulting composite much more acceptable to our photographic eye. But back here, well, I think you've got the idea. Now with another change on the screen, I've just brought you to the headlight just to show you in detail what I did here. I just went round the edge and I left that center portion to deal with just a little bit later. When I got down to the tyres, the part that's in the grass I just give a wide berth. By the changing of the screen again, you can see that I brought up the image where I created the outline. If I hold the Alt key and click the mask, you can see what I did. That's the part that took me 10 minutes, not a great deal of time. I suppose we've got two choices here. We've got some holes in the wheels in between the spokes which we need to deal with. Only the pieces that go through to the grass or the background. There's a few around here, I think there's a couple there and a couple on the back wheel. We can leave the base of the wheel for the moment. So we've got two choices. We can either tackle those, and we've got to do inside the screen as well, or we could just flood the outer edge in now and just break it off into bite-sized pieces. Doesn't really matter, but let's show you the technique here. So I'm going to go back to Alt and clicking the mask, because to make the grass and all of the background disappear, I've got to paint into the background outside the outline in black. Now I could use my paint bucket tool, but we did see some evidence of a little line when we used the same sort of option in Quick Mask. So here's a way we can work around that. If I zoom in to the edge, we can see the softness of the selection that I've created with my mask. Actually, it's not a selection yet. I suppose I should just call it my mask. But if I pick up the magic wand, I can select everything in the outer area. Pretty easy. But when we zoom in, we can see that the line's not in the correct place. I need to bring that line in 2 or 3 pixels. I can do that. I usually do that with Select, Modify, Expand. 2 pixels. Bingo, right in the center. I'll hit Control 0 so you can see what I'm about to do. All I need to do now is flood that selection with black, and it'll flood tight to the center of that black line. So Alt backspace, Control D, turn on the layer. There's stage 1 completed. All we need to do now is exactly the same in some of those smaller areas. So if we zoom in really tight, it all becomes a lot easier to do. There we have the image, probably as big as we need it. Let's go over here to the mask and select it. I can touch the B key to select my brush tool again. I've got some very small places here, so I could do those That's a little bit too high, so I'm going to drop the zoom down a little bit. In these instances I'm going to suggest we make the brush a lot smaller and we just do these in one go. We won't worry about putting a selection in these because they're almost too small to cope, so we'll just do these manually. Here we'll just increase the brush just a little bit because we're back to that shift click method. So all we've got to do here, it's just careful work, but the more you do it the quicker it becomes, and you can see exactly what I'm doing, no different from the surrounding edge of the car. Now there is a couple of cutouts we can do here. I would suggest we could do those right now with the mask. Make the brush very small, just do those manually. I'll just do one more, but I don't think there's more I can tell you about this shift click method. Click, hold the shift, click, 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 click. There's along the edge of the spoke, around the rim. And of course we would do exactly the same with these as we did with the outside of the car. When we look at the mask a little bit later on, we'll see all of the shapes that we've got to flood with black. Now with the changing of the screen again, I've done most of the other selections. I've just got the base of the front wheel to do. You can see I've made the outline shapes. So if we hold the Alt key and click the mask, there you can see the shapes. Not too difficult. If they were very small I just did them manually, but if not, I'm going to select my magic wand, just click into these because I can add one selection to another, and we should be able to expand the selection the same number of pixels I guess, but it's worth just taking a look, maybe less, because I've got a smaller brush. I think if we expand by probably about 1, so let's select, modify, expand, we'll choose 1 pixel. I think that's going to be okay, and then Alt backspace. There we should have our car cut out, apart from that annoying part at the bottom of the tyres. But there we have it, that is the technique. So if we accept that the outline took 10 minutes, even if it took another 10 minutes to do all of the bits in between the spokes, we're talking about 20 minutes to get to this stage. And because we're working with a mask, you don't have to do it all in one go. Just save your Photoshop file, come back the next day and do it in stages if you wish. Now as you can see here, there's one stage we've got left. We've got all of those shapes to cut out, and that could be quite tedious if we did that manually. What I'm going to do here is turn to my magic wand tool. I'm going to select that from the toolbox, make sure the tolerance is set to the standard 32, and I'm going to need to add one selection to another. I'm going to carefully, you can see I've got the image very large here, so I'm just going to, see I made a mistake there, hit Ctrl Z to undo that. Take a bit of care with this, but it's not difficult work, just a little bit time consuming I suppose, but the magic wand is going to do a good enough job. It may leave a bit of a halo, but maybe we'll take a look a little bit later on if we feel it is something we need to address. We've got to take the green as well as the pale colour there. I think that's all in the background. I'll just do down to that first section, because once I get to that point, given that these are very small areas, I think what I will do is leave them as they are. Open up my layers palette. In fact, I should have had that out on screen, must have locked it away. Select the mask. I'm going to select black, select my brush. My brush is set to 100%, so everything apart from inside that mesh is protected, so I can wipe away what's inside. Then I can move down and do the next section, and so on. When I zoom in and show you that task completed, it doesn't look too bad, does it? But I've just put a plain black background behind it, and when I turn it on, now it doesn't look quite so nice. So here's a way we can fix that. Create a new blank layer right at the top of the layered stack. Hold the Alt key, run your cursor between the two layers and click. That clips this layer with our Bentley. It's going to allow us to paint just on the shape that we've cut out, because the rest is protected by the mask. So if I pick up my standard brush, if you look up at the top of the screen, I've dropped my flow rate down to about 10%. I can hold the Alt key and I can click the green from somewhere around here. Now if I start to paint gently, need to be a bit careful, especially in these areas here. Maybe I can just go on the inside and leave that out a bit. There you can see, with a little bit of care, we can deal with those. I'll push my flow rate up to about 20%. I think I can get away with that. And suddenly everything starts to look a lot more effective. But you could leave this until you get your image against this new background. You may even find you don't have to. But add a new layer, clip it just above the layer that you're masking, sample the color. You may have to change the sampling point depending on the project you're working on, but as you can see here, we can cover up a multitude of sins if we just work a little bit carefully around the edge and fix all those little grids. In the next video we can take a look at transforming a selection to try to do something better with the wheels and the tyres. But before we move on, I felt I wanted to show you what I decided to do with the Bentley once I got the tyres sorted. And we're going to look at how this was achieved a little bit later, but of course 95% of the work, probably more, is the cutout and dealing with the tyres. Once we've done that, the rest is pretty simple. So let's move on and take a look at transforming a selection.